He lived alone for 10 years until a widow knocked in the storm. The rain fell sideways on the Maine coast, wind howling like a wounded thing through the cliffs and trees. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks below with a fury that had torn ships in half. Nora Ellis gripped her son's hand tighter as they trudged up the winding path toward the only glow left in the world, the steady blink of the old Gull Point lighthouse. Her coat was soaked through, seams splitting at the shoulders, and her boots squelched with every step. She pulled Finn closer, the little boy shivering inside his oversized hoodie, soaked curls clinging to his cheeks. "We're almost there," she whispered, though her throat burned from the cold and salt. "Just a little farther, baby." Finn didn't speak. Too cold, too tired. His small frame leaned into hers, a limp weight of exhaustion and fear. The flashlight had died hours ago, leaving only the rhythmic flash from the lighthouse to guide them. When they reached the foot of the tall stone tower, Nora raised a trembling hand and knocked. Twice, then a third time, harder. The door stayed closed. Rain dripped down her nose. She knocked again, her voice barely audible. "Please." Inside, Eli Tamarin, the lighthouse keeper, looked up from his worn journal. He was a man carved from silence. Tall, gray-bearded, eyes like winter sky. The knocks startled him. Few made it out this far, and none without warning. He rose stiffly and reached for the lantern and the iron latch. When he opened the door, the storm pushed against him like a wall. And there, soaked, shivering, eyes full of something broken, stood a woman and a boy. "We just need a place to wait out the storm," Nora rasped. "Please, we'll be gone by morning." Eli's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a shelter. I'm not asking for charity. I just need my son to live through the night." That sentence struck harder than the wind. Eli's gaze dropped to the boy. Finn's lips were nearly blue. Something in him cracked, something buried deep beneath years of solitude. He stepped aside. "Inside. Both of you." Nora nearly collapsed from relief. She gathered Finn into her arms and stumbled through the door. Eli shut it behind them with a loud clang, shutting out the storm. The warmth of the lighthouse hit her like sunlight. A small wood stove flickered in the corner, its orange glow reaching out to them. Eli dropped a heavy blanket over Finn, who curled up like a kitten on the worn rug. Then he handed another to Nora without a word. "No tea," he muttered. "Just heat." She nodded, holding the blanket tight. "Thank you." "This isn't permanent," he warned. "I understand." But as the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, Eli stood in silence, watching the strangers warm themselves by his hearth. And for the first time in 10 long years, the lighthouse wasn't just keeping ships safe. Ani. It was saving people too. The storm clawed at the windows like it wanted in, but inside, the lighthouse was holding steady. "Hara." Eli Tamarin moved with quiet precision. He poured water from a kettle into 2 chipped enamel mugs, steam rising like breath from an old ghost. "Nothing fancy," he muttered, placing one in front of Nora, the other near Finn, who had fallen into a shivering doze on the braided rug. Nora took the mug with both hands. Her fingers trembled against the heat. "You didn't have to let us in," she said softly. "No," Eli replied, settling into his worn chair by the stove. "I didn't." The silence that followed wasn't cold, just wary. Nora glanced around. The lighthouse interior was simple. Wood walls faded from salt air, shelves lined with maps, tools, a radio that looked like it hadn't worked since the 90s. A set of boots too large for her son sat by the door. The only sign anyone lived here was the clock ticking steadily above the mantel, and the fire that burned without pause. Finn stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mama? I'm here, sweetheart," she murmured, kneeling beside him. Eli watched her wrap the blanket tighter around the boy and smooth back his wet curls. The way she moved, familiar, tired, protective, it tugged something in his chest he hadn't let move in years. "You got a place to go?" he asked. Nora didn't look up. "I thought I did." Eli waited, Silence stretched between them until it broke on her breath. "My sister. She said we could come after we left. But when we got to the ferry station, there was nothing. No answer. No ride. Just rain. So we walked." Eli's jaw clenched. He said nothing. "Chuff." Nora finally raised her eyes. "We don't want to be a burden. Just a roof until morning." Eli stood. "You'll take the cot. The boy can stay by the fire. I'll keep the watch upstairs." "I can sleep on the floor," she offered. "My rules," he said, already climbing the stairs. From the loft, he kept his eye on the lamp and one ear on the quiet sounds below. Blankets shifting, the soft exhale of a child at peace. He'd kept this lighthouse for 13 winters, through gales and loneliness and the ache of grief that had made silence a second skin. No one had crossed his threshold since he buried his wife and son on the headland behind the rocks. But now there were voices here. Warmth. A boy humming softly in his sleep. Eli turned back to the storm window and lit the beacon, casting it far into the sea like a prayer. Below, Nora whispered something to Finn. And though Eli couldn't hear the words, he understood the feeling. Tonight, against every rule he'd set for himself, he'd let something in. And tomorrow, when the clouds cleared, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to let it go. Morning came slow and gray, a soft mist clinging to the shoreline like breath on glass. The storm had moved on, but it left behind silence, the kind that felt like it was listening. Eli descended the stairs quietly, expecting to find the strangers asleep. Instead, he stopped short. Nora was already up, crouched near the stove, feeding it kindling with one hand while the other rested on Finn's shoulder. Her wet coat from the night before now hung by the fire, steam rising from its sleeves. "You're up early," Eli said, voice rasped with sleep. "Old habits," Nora replied, not turning around. "Can't sleep in when you've got a child to keep warm and nowhere else to be." He didn't answer, just walked past her and opened the pantry. It was modest. Tins of beans, dried bread, a few root vegetables. "Hope you like eggs," he muttered, pulling a carton from the cold box. "Only if they're real," she said with the faintest smile. "Hen out back's cranky, but loyal." He cracked 2 into a pan and let them sizzle while Finn stirred on the rug, eyes blinking open. "Mama?" "I'm here, baby," she said gently, crouching to rub warmth into his arms. Eli glanced back, watching them. The boy's eyes were clearer now, still tired, but no longer glazed with cold. He looked up and met Eli's gaze. "Did the storm go away?" "For now," Eli said, "but storms have a way of coming back." Finn nodded like he understood more than a 6-year-old should. "You live here all by yourself?" "I do. Don't you get lonely?" Eli paused, the spatula mid-turn. "Sometimes," he said at last, "but the sea's got a voice if you know how to listen." Finn seemed satisfied with that. Breakfast was quiet. Nora ate slowly, as if unsure how long the food would last. Finn devoured everything on his plate and looked ready for more. Eli passed him a slice of toast without a word. Later, Nora helped wash the dishes, though Eli didn't ask. "You didn't have to feed us," she said softly. "You didn't have to knock on my door." She turned to him. "Why did you open it?" He looked at her for a long time. "Because once, someone knocked on mine, and I didn't." That silenced her. The sea beat steadily against the rocks below. Eli stood and walked to the window. "You're not the first to come here needing shelter. Most leave with the weather. But you—" He stopped, choosing his words. "You didn't just come through a storm. You carried it with you." Nora's hands stilled in the wash basin. "I didn't mean to. I didn't say that like it's a bad thing." Their eyes met, hers unsure, his steady. Outside, the mist lifted just enough to see the sea. Inside, something else was lifting too. Not the storm, but the weight of being alone. The mist lingered into the afternoon, blanketing the cliffs in a soft gray hush. Eli stood outside the lighthouse, patching a cracked window frame, while inside, the sound of Nora's humming floated up through the open door. Finn sat on the porch step with a mug of warm milk in both hands, his small feet dangling above the sand-crusted stones. He watched the waves roll in with wide, quiet eyes. "You always lived here?" he asked without turning. Eli looked up from his work. Long enough to know every rock in the bay. Finn nodded solemnly. Mama says we'll stop running soon. Eli didn't reply. He just drove another nail into the frame. Inside, Nora was scrubbing the floorboards with a wet cloth and half a bar of yellow soap. It wasn't expected of her, but something about the stillness of the place had stirred a need to care for it, like it had already begun to mean something. Later, when the lightkeeper's duties were done, and the sea had gone quiet again, they gathered by the fire. Nora sat curled in the chair, a patchwork quilt around her shoulders. Finn leaned against her hip, drawing crooked boats on the corner of a newspaper. Eli stood at the window with a steaming mug in hand, but he wasn't really looking at the ocean anymore. "What happened to your family?" Nora asked quietly, not pressing, just asking. Eli didn't flinch. He stared into the fire, the silence around him shifting. Fever took them, wife and son. 10 years ago this winter. Nora's face softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "I stayed here because it was easier to look out than look back." She traced the rim of her mug. "I was married too. His name was Blake, the kind of man who fills a room until you can't breathe. Thought I was lucky at first. Until I wasn't." Eli turned, listening. He was good at making promises, bad at keeping them. When he got mean, he always said he was just tired. And when he left, he said I'd made him into something he wasn't. She looked down. "I think he just didn't like mirrors." Eli walked over and crouched beside the hearth. He fed another log into the fire, slow and steady. "You don't seem afraid now," he said. "I was, for a long time. But being afraid won't keep Finn warm, or fed, or safe." She looked at him then. "So I kept moving, until I found light in the dark." The fire cracked, sending sparks upward. Neither of them said what they both thought, that maybe the lighthouse wasn't the only thing keeping the sea from swallowing everything. That maybe, somehow, the storm had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. The wind picked up again that evening, sweeping in from the sea with a chill sharp enough to bite through the cracks in the walls. Eli lit the second stove upstairs, a rare move he hadn't done in years, but tonight wasn't ordinary. Downstairs, Nora had put Finn to bed near the hearth, where the boy slept curled like a kitten in his borrowed blanket. She'd stayed awake, brushing out her damp hair, the rhythm slow and almost meditative. Eli was in the small side room, sorting through old tools when the crash came. Porcelain. Sharp, final. He rushed out to find Nora kneeling near the far shelf, one hand over her mouth, the other hovering over the broken pieces of a blue ceramic lantern. Finn stood beside her, eyes wide with guilt and terror. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, voice shaking. "I just wanted to see it up close. I didn't know it would fall." Nora's face was pale. "It's okay, sweetheart, we'll clean it up." But Eli was already kneeling beside the broken glass, turning over one of the larger shards in his calloused palm. "That belonged to my son," he said quietly. Finn's lip trembled. I can leave. I didn't mean—" "No," Eli said, his voice low but not harsh. "We don't run from mistakes. We fix them." Finn blinked, not sure if he'd heard right. Eli rose and walked to a drawer. When he returned, he held out a small tube of glue and a soft cloth. "You ever fix something broken?" Finn nodded slowly. "I think at school once." "Good. Then we'll do this together." Nora watched in silence, heart in her throat, as Eli and her son sat cross-legged on the floor, heads bent over broken pieces. Eli guided Finn's little hands with surprising gentleness, showing him where to hold steady, how to press without cracking, when to wait before the glue dried. "It might not be perfect," Eli said, "but sometimes the cracks are the proof we tried." After the final piece was placed, they sat back. The lantern was misshapen, webbed with thin lines of gold where Eli had filled the gaps with powdered dust and glue. It glimmered, not like new, but like something survived. Finn smiled sleepily. "It's pretty. It's real," Eli said. Later that night, after Nora had cleaned the last shard from the floor, she found Eli on the porch, the wind tossing his graying hair. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He didn't turn. Didn't do it for thanks. Still, her voice trembled as she stepped closer. You didn't just help Finn tonight. You helped me remember what it felt like to be safe. Eli said nothing, but when she turned to go, he reached out, just for a second, and placed his hand gently over hers. It wasn't much, but for people who had lost so much, it was everything. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. 3 days passed, carried on the wind like sea mist, soft and steady. The storm had long gone, but its memory lingered, in the soggy footprints on the stairs, the faint smell of wet wool, the creak of floorboards now shared by 3 sets of feet. Finn had taken to life at the lighthouse with the wonder of a child discovering treasure. He chased gulls at low tide, helped Eli coil the lamp cables, and carved seashells with a butter knife. Nora, too, had settled into the rhythm, cooking, sweeping, sewing patches into old linens with a quiet care Eli hadn't seen in years. Then, one morning, it arrived. No knock. No warning, then be me's, then Eli picked it up. No return address. Just Nora's name in sharp, angled handwriting that made his chest tighten. He handed it to her without a word. C stared at it for a long moment before opening it. As her eyes scanned the single line inside, her breath caught. You've got what's mine. Silas. Her hands trembled, the paper fluttering to the floor like ash. He found us, she whispered. Eli's jaw tensed. Who? Nora sat down, hard. Silas Hart. Finn's father. The man I ran from. Her voice was low, but it carried weight. He never cared about Finn. Not until he learned Finn's grandfather left him a small plot of land. Coastal property. Nothing grand, but valuable. And now it's leverage. Eli stared at her. And he wants the boy back? She nodded slowly. He'll say it's for Finn's good, but it's always been about control. There was a long silence, broken only by the distant cry of gulls. He's not taking him, Eli said at last. Not while you're under this roof. That afternoon, Eli went into town, something he hadn't done in months. He walked straight to the corkboard outside the Harbor General Store and tacked up a small square of paper. Meeting at Gull Point Lighthouse, noon, Saturday. No further explanation, but in a place like Saltmere, no one needed one. Eli Tamarin never called for help, so when he did, people listened. Saturday came, meeting Apison. And so did they. Doug. Fisherman. Boatwrights. The school teacher. Even Pastor Henry with his old Bible and cane. They stood in the sand around the lighthouse like a tide line drawn in flesh and blood. Eli stepped onto the porch, hands firm on the railing. I took in a woman and her boy this winter, he said, not because I had to, because it was right. He paused. Now the man who left them behind wants the boy back, not for love, for gain. A ripple moved through the crowd. Eli's voice didn't waver. He's coming here with threats, maybe with lawyers. But I won't let them take what's not theirs, not while I draw breath. Someone in the back shouted, We've got your back, Eli. More heads nodded. From the window, Nora watched it unfold. Finn pressed his face to the glass beside her. Son. What's happening, Mama? She knelt beside him, voice thick with emotion. We're being chosen, baby. And outside, in the salt-laced wind, Eli stood taller than the lighthouse behind him. Because this time, when the storm came, he would not be weathered down by it. Machsibi Mamahaf. He would stand in front of it, the Sunlanehouse. Silas Hart arrived on a Monday. He didn't come alone. A sleek black car rolled up the gravel path, tires crunching like bone beneath the weight of entitlement. Silas stepped out first, tall, well-groomed, a smirk plastered beneath his designer sunglasses. Behind him came a man in a tailored navy suit, briefcase in one hand and legal confidence in the other. Eli was already on the porch, arms crossed, boots planted like anchors in the wood. "Afternoon," Silas called, flashing a smile too sharp. "Heard you've been playing house with what's mine." Eli didn't blink. "You lost that right when you walked out." The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Hart has legal custody. These are the court documents." He handed over a stack thick enough to choke a lighthouse's chimney. Nora appeared in the doorway behind Eli. Finn clung to her skirt, sensing the tension. Silas saw them and raised his chin. "Come on, Nora. You know I'm the boy's father." She stepped forward, trembling but firm. "You don't get to use that word. You left us with nothing but lies and bruises." The crowd was gathering again, neighbors who had returned not by summons, but by loyalty. Silas looked around, suddenly aware he wasn't welcome. "You think a mob's gonna change what the law says?" "No," Eli said, "but it might remind you what it doesn't say, like how to be a man." The lawyer held up the custody papers. "We'll see you in court." "Good," Eli said flatly. "We'll be there." The courtroom was full that Friday. For a town that rarely saw traffic tickets disputed, the custody hearing of Finn Hart was an event no one wanted to miss. The judge was stern, silver-haired and slow to speak. Silas's lawyer led with paperwork, documents showing biological rights, financial standing, and a timeline of Nora's unpredictable travel. But then came the people. Mrs. Camden, the schoolteacher. Nora enrolled Finn within a week of arriving. He never missed a lesson. Pastor Henry. She's at church every Sunday, even when she can't stop worrying. The lighthouse mechanic. Kid cleaned barnacles off the boat ramp for a cookie and a kind word. I never saw Silas lift a finger for him. Then came Eli. He stood in his patched coat, face lined by sun and sorrow. "I'm not here to say I'm Finn's father," he said, "but I am his safe place. The first night they arrived, that boy looked like the wind might blow him away. Now he runs through my lighthouse like he owns the place. And maybe he should, because home isn't where you're born, it's where you're held." The judge listened, nodded once, and recessed for an hour. Back in the hallway, Nora sat beside Eli, her hands white-knuckled in her lap. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "I do," Eli said. "We don't run, not anymore." When the judge returned, the courtroom held its breath. "In the matter of Finn Hart," he said, "custody shall remain with Nora Ellis. The court finds that removing the child from a stable, loving environment would do harm, regardless of biological claims." Petition denied. Silas shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous." "No," the judge said calmly. "This is justice." As Silas stormed out, his lawyer trailing behind, the town didn't cheer. They simply exhaled like a storm had passed. Eli helped Nora to her feet, then wrapped his arms around both of them. "We get to stay?" he asked. Eli smiled down at him. "We were never going to let you go." They returned to the lighthouse under a soft, golden dusk. The sea was calm, the kind of calm that comes only after a hard fight, when the wind finally bows and the waves fall quiet out of respect. That night, after Finn had fallen asleep in the old armchair with a book slipping from his hand, Nora wandered down the hall and paused. A door stood open. It hadn't been before. She stepped closer. The room was small, square, and smelled faintly of salt and cedar. Fresh paint covered the walls in a soft, sandy beige. But one section, right by the window, had been left bare and painted instead with a simple mural, a large blue starfish, and a small hand-painted lighthouse, crooked but proud. Below it, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Finn's room," carefully copied in bright blue crayon. Nora's breath hitched. On the shelf, a small stack of books. On the bed, a patchwork quilt stitched from old sailing flags. On the wall above the headboard, a framed drawing. Finn's, she realized, of a boat with 3 figures, a man with a beard, a woman with long hair, and a little boy between them. She turned to find Eli standing in the doorway, arms folded, looking uncharacteristically unsure. You made this?" she asked, voice soft. He shrugged. Figured he'd need a place to keep his shells and hide from storms. Nora stepped forward, running a hand across the edge of the windowsill. "You fixed the broken frame." "Seemed like time," he murmured. Place hadn't been used in years. He didn't say since his son, but the silence held the words. Nora turned, tears caught in her lashes. "This is more than a room." Eli looked away. "He deserves more." She crossed the room and hugged him before she could second-guess it. At first he stiffened, unused to it. But slowly his arms came around her, strong, sure, unhurried. "I don't know what this is yet," she whispered. "Or where it leads." Eli spoke into her hair. "I don't need to know yet. I just want to be part of it." That night, as stars blinked to life across the sky and the beacon swept its light out over the dark, Finn slept, curled beneath the sailcloth quilt. The mural glowed faintly in the moonlight. A hand-carved wooden whale sat on the shelf beside his pillow. And in the kitchen, Nora poured tea while Eli repaired the frayed edge of a rug. They moved quietly, in rhythm, in peace, not out of necessity, but out of something beginning to feel like belonging. The sea was still, the night was warm, and for the first time, the lighthouse didn't just guard ships. Nanami, it held a family. Twum. The call came less than a week later. A second attempt. Silas Hart wasn't finished. This time, he wasn't coming with veiled threats or hand-delivered letters. He was coming with a court order from the County Superior Court, seeking full, permanent custody of Finn Hart. When Nora read the summons, her hands trembled. "He won't stop until he wins," she whispered. Eli took the paper from her, his eyes narrowing as he read the details. "Then we'll just have to win first." They drove to Port Wyndham 2 days later, where the courthouse sat like an old ship on a stone hill, firm, formal, unforgiving. Inside, a judge waited with a stack of files. The room was colder than any ocean wind Nora had ever stood in. Silas had come dressed like the hero of his own story. Navy tie, pressed collar, slicked back hair. His lawyer looked smug, as if the outcome was already sealed. Nora, on the other hand, wore a modest navy dress. Her hands never let go of Finn's for a second, until she had to step forward. Silas's lawyer went first. "Your Honor, my client is the child's biological father, a man of means and property. Miss Ellis, while no doubt well-intentioned, has moved frequently, has no formal employment, and lives in a decommissioned lighthouse with a retired civilian." Nora listened with a tight jaw, fingers clenched in her lap. Then, their lawyer rose. Eli had called in a favor with Margot Lane, a no-nonsense attorney who had once lost her son to a system that mistook paperwork for truth. "Your Honor," Margot began calmly, "we have witness statements from over a dozen members of Saltmere. We have school attendance, a clean health record since moving, and community service logged weekly." She glanced at Silas. "What we don't have, what Mr. Hart cannot produce, is evidence of involvement, financial support, or emotional care. For 6 years, he was absent." Then came the witness bench. Mrs. Avery, the librarian. "Finn knows the name of every sea creature in the children's section. Captain Brody, he helped untangle a net bigger than he was. Pastor Henry, he reads a prayer every Sunday, with both hands on the page like it's holy." Then Eli took the stand. "Captain Hen, he didn't bring notes. He didn't wear a tie. Captain Hen, I'm not Finn's father," he began. "Not by blood. But I taught him how to tie a sailor's knot. I gave him the first room he's ever had with his name on the wall. And I've watched him run down the lighthouse stairs like he finally knows he's safe." He paused, voice rough. "You don't have to share blood to be family, you just have to show up. And stay." The judge sat back, silent, still. And then, after what felt like the length of a whole storm season, he spoke. "In the matter of Finn Hart, this court finds it in the child's best interest to remain in the primary custody of Nora Ellis, with no visitation rights awarded to Mr. Hart. This court recognizes the child's right to safety, stability, and love, none of which have been demonstrated by the petitioner." The gavel fell. The echo rang like church bells. Nora broke into quiet sobs. Finn clutched her arm. And Eli, silent, still, allowed a single breath to escape him. Silas stormed from the courtroom, his steps hollow. But no one followed him. They followed Nora and Finn and Eli into the light. The sun set slow over the Atlantic, spilling gold across the water like melted promise. Gulls wheeled lazily in the salt blue sky. The lighthouse at Gull Point stood tall and proud, no longer just a beacon for ships, but now a witness to something beginning. The town had come again, this time not for judgment but for joy. Long tables stretched across the yard, draped in white linens, and decorated with jars of wildflowers. Children chased each other through dune grass. Music floated from a fiddle and a battered radio, blending laughter with the smell of sea and pie. And near the weathered porch steps stood Nora in a simple cream dress, hair pinned back with a few wind-tossed curls. Her eyes were bright, cheeks flushed with emotion, hands holding a small bouquet of dried lavender and sea daisies. Finn tugged at her dress hem, wearing a vest 2 sizes too big and his lighthouse boots. "You look like a painting, Mama," he whispered. She smiled down at him, her voice soft. "I feel like one." Then the music shifted, and from the far path that curved around the bluff came Eli. He wore a clean white shirt beneath a slate-gray vest. His beard was trimmed, his hair combed, and in his hand, he carried a small box carved from driftwood. When he reached the steps, he stopped, took a breath, then knelt. "I gave Finn a gift once," Eli said, loud enough for all to hear. "A little wooden whale, because I wanted him to remember the first place he felt safe." He opened the box. Inside sat a ring of silver, simple and strong, with a small carved engraving inside. "Let the light lead you home." "Now I want to give you this," he said, looking up at Nora, "because you brought the light back, and I don't want to face another storm without you." Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 yeses." The crowd erupted. Cheers echoed against the cliffs. Pastor Henry, standing beside the lantern tower, clapped his hands and pronounced them husband and wife. Eli stood and pulled Nora into his arms, kissed her in the golden light, while Finn whooped beside them, hugging their legs. "I get to keep you both?" the boy asked, eyes shining. Eli crouched and lifted him easily into his arms. "You always had us, kid." That night, under a sky bursting with stars, the lighthouse windows glowed, not just from lantern flame, but from life. People danced under strings of warm lights. Stories were told, sea shanties were sung. And laughter, real, free, full, rang down the coast. Later, when only embers glowed in the fire pit and Finn had fallen asleep beside the steps, Nora and Eli stood by the railing, hands intertwined. "You think it'll last?" she asked. Eli looked at the ocean, at the lighthouse, at the boy asleep in the moonlight. "It already has." And above them, the light turned once more, sweeping out across the water, over boats and waves, and the long, beautiful unknown ahead. Not a warning this time, but a welcome. Morning came soft and golden, creeping in through the salt-specked windows of the lighthouse. A gull cried in the distance. The waves whispered against the rocks like they always had, but the silence inside was no longer heavy, it was full. Nora stood barefoot in the kitchen, flour on her hands, and a half-braided loaf rising in a ceramic bowl. The old radio crackled gently with a low folk tune. She hummed along without realizing it. Eli stepped in from the front door, brushing sand from his boots. "The hens left you 3 eggs this morning," he said, placing them on the counter. She glanced at him over her shoulder, smirking. "They like you more than they like me. I don't argue with birds." Footsteps clattered down the stairs. Light. Quick. Finn appeared with his sketchbook in hand, grinning. "I finished my lighthouse drawing." He held it up proudly. The tall tower, his new room with the starfish mural, Eli in his porch chair, and Nora in her apron, all drawn in colored pencil with wild, loving lines. Nora knelt to see it closer. "You even got the weather vane crooked. Perfect." Eli ruffled the boy's hair. "Frame it and hang it on the wall?" Finn nodded. "Can I put it next to the whale carving?" "It's your wall now," Eli said. "You decide what goes on it." Outside, The land was stirring to life. Neighbors arrived in pairs and threes, carrying baskets and tools. Captain Brody brought rope for new nets. Mrs. Avery dropped off books for Finn. Even old Marcy from the post office came with a bucket of blue paint for the side porch. The lighthouse wasn't just a home now. Light. It was part of the town again. Samagpisasbal, Naces Araxnis Bisab. Nora stood in the doorway watching it unfold, one hand resting on the frame, the other lightly over her heart. Eli came up behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "We built something," she said softly. He nodded, eyes fixed on the field beyond. "And we'll keep building." She turned toward him. "Even when storms come back?" He kissed her forehead, slow and steady. "Especially then." That night, the three of them stood by the beacon as it rotated over the sea. Finn rested his head on Nora's shoulder, one arm looped around Eli's waist. The ocean was dark, but not frightening. The wind, sharp but not cruel. Below them, the kitchen light glowed like a heart. Eli pointed out to sea. Out there, people are always looking for land, for a place to come home to. Nora leaned her head against his. "And here," she said, "we've built it." The beam swept across the water once more. A signal. A welcome. A promise. This wasn't a story about rescue anymore, no si messi. It was a story about return. And as stars bloomed one by one in the sky above Gull Point, the lighthouse stood tall, not just as a tower of stone and light, but as a beacon called home. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.